This is a Blairing Out with Eric Blair show, revisiting a classic 2003 interview with Geoff Downes, English musician, songwriter, and record producer. Best known for his work as keyboardist for the Buggles, Yes, and the supergroup Asia. Hey, Geoff.
I'm very well, thanks, Eric. How are you?
Good. You guys are actually going to be playing over at this amphitheater in a few hours, right?
That's right, yes. We're looking forward to it. It's a very unusual venue for us to be playing, but it looks lovely here.
Do you prefer an intimate acoustic performance to the big stage show?
You can actually get a lot out of each, but I think that it's very nice to play in an intimate environment because you've got people that close to you. They can see what you're doing. You can kind of work with them, whereas if you're on the big stage, you're kind of a little bit removed, but it should be really good. We're looking forward to it.
Now, growing up in a musical family, did you have any doubts in your mind that you would be a professional?
I'd be professional, but I knew that I'd always be involved in music of some degree. My mother played the piano. She played very well. My father was a church organist, and so I started in a choir when I was about 6. So I was I was weaned on it, if you like. I think that it was pretty much the only way that I really wanted to go.
How did the Leeds College of Music prepare you for your future musical achievements?
Well, actually, the Leeds Music College was the first college in the UK to actually concentrate on modern music, and that's what really attracted me to it. So I was one of the first students on the course that was quite revolutionary. We were studying Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea and people like that, as opposed to in the other more classical colleges, they were studying Bach and Beethoven.
That was a big influence for you.
Well, certainly at that time, because it was the time I was at college was when it was really kicking in, and I used to see a lot of these guys return to Forever, and Alphonso Johnson with Weather Report, people like that. Who, funnily enough, we did a gig with Alphonso Johnson a couple of nights ago in Chicago. So
how was that?
It was amazing. He didn't look any older. I was thinking, what's up with this guy?
Tell me about the first time you met Trevor Horn and your time backing Tina Charles.
The Bible of the day in London at that time was actually Melody Maker, which doesn't exist anymore. It went out of business about 10 years ago. But that was like the musician's Bible, where they'd always advertise for people to be in bands. And Tina Charles was actually advertising for personnel for a band, and Trevor was actually the MD of that band. So that's how I got to meet Trevor. He gave me the job because I had a Moog synthesizer.
And what did you think of him? What was your first impression of him?
Well, I think we got on very well straight away because we had very similar tastes in music. We were both really into Yes, which is funny that eventually we both ended up joining them.
Yeah.
But we were very much into Yes. We liked Genesis. Not really the kind of music we were doing at the time. It was our sort of secret sideline. But we were also very much into the pop scene at the time, and hence that's what really put the Buggles thing together.
How are the Buggles born now? After you guys were together for a while.
Well, Tina stopped touring. She didn't want to tour anymore, and Trevor and myself carried on writing. And he was writing with another guy called Bruce Woolley at the time. Mm-hmm. He had quite a few songs with Bruce, and he kind of rode me into it. And really, Video Killed the Radio Star, and quite a few other songs that were on that album or on the first 3 Buggles albums were actually. Came out of that writing period.
And were you guys trying to change the face of music? Because for that time, the Buggles fit in with kind of the new wave sound.
Yeah, I think we were pretty early when it comes to actual the pop duo. The electronic pop duo was quite an unusual thing then. But it was very much we wanted to make musical sounds out of synthesizers rather than hiring guys in to do things. So it gave us the ultimate control, and I think that's what it was. The Buggles really was a big control for us, that we could actually say, well, instead of getting a guy to come in and play a violin, we'll try and get that sound out of a string machine or something. So that was how we used to emulate orchestral instruments or virtually anything, making silly sounds on voices and that sort of thing. It was very experimental times. Video came out in '79, and it was a big hit around the world, apart from America, where it was actually only a was a moderate hit. It was an airplay hit, but it didn't actually, wasn't a big selling single or anything. And I think it was really just when 2 years later, when MTV came out, they just wanted their signature song, and that was the one that they picked for kicking the station off.
MTV is born, and Video Killed the Radio Star goes to #1.
I think it's nice, it's nice to be a part of that history, because MTV's obviously come into, has made an enormous impact on the music scene in the last 20 years. So in that respect, it's nice to have been associated with it. But, I suppose they had to pick something, and I'm glad they did pick Video Killed the Radio Star.
Now, what was your first taste of fame like during that period? And how did you deal with that?
I think both me and Trevor dealt with it okay, because we came from absolutely nowhere. No one really knew who we were. We were signed to Ireland as a couple of staff writers and producers. And we actually had done a few other records for them as producers prior to Video coming out. And they were, we had a modest degree of success in that area. But I think when Video came out, we really said, right, this is it, we're going to concentrate on this and get this up and running. And I think that it was a great feeling to go to #1, out of the blue, because the record went up in about 3 or 4 weeks. And it was absolutely everywhere, and it was all over Europe and all over the world, so it was a massive hit.
Now, one of the songs on there, a song about L Street, tell me what inspired that song and what's it about?
Well, that was actually inspired by Trevor was living up in Elstree Studios, is where they used to make a lot of the B movies in the 60s, British B movies. And it's a kind of similar theme to Video Killed the Radio Star in a way. Trevor used to drive past there because he was living up in Hertfordshire at the time, and the studios became very abandoned. There was like old props from old 50s and 60s films, and I think it was a sort of equivalent of what video was for the guy on the radio. This was the guy in films, he had a part in a B movie, that sort of thing. It was, and he used to drink, there used to be like Italian restaurants called the Gioconda around, he was drinking coffee there. So that's what inspired the lyric, I think, for that song.
I love the orchestration on all the music on that album. Every time you listen to it, you can hear something new.
Well, I think we approached it quite differently, because a lot of people obviously now they use drum machines all over the place. We actually used to get the drummer to play like one of those old rhythm boxes. So we'd get a pattern from a rhythm box and actually get the drummer to copy it exactly in time, So he'd play along to the rhythm box, and you get a proper drum kit sound, but of course it would be playing the pattern of a rhythm box. So we kind of approached it from a very formative way, and then everything else obviously we just used to create with synths and stuff.
The Buggles later on go to Brian Lane for management and end up being in Yes. Tell me about this transformation.
Well, I think Brian came into the scene. We'd already had a reasonable amount of success with the Buggles. Obviously we'd had Video and a couple of other singles had done well, and I think we were looking for a bigger. We didn't really have management at the time, so we were looking for something that could actually push us forward. And it was by pure coincidence that we bumped into Brian Lane, and he was obviously managed Yes from a very early period. He somehow put us together with them to write a couple of songs. We wrote one song called You Can Fly From Here, which was not actually included on the drama album. It was recorded at the time.
And you recorded that with Bill Bruford.
That's correct.
He was on drums for that.
We had a song which we'd actually recorded with the Buggles' second album called I'm a Camera, which you may know. And they really liked this song and wanted us to get involved to put that together with them. So that's how Into the Lens came. And then as we got more and more into it, because there were only 3 of them working together, Anderson had gone, Rick Wakeman had gone, I was a keyboard player, Trevor was a singer, the impossible happened.
Yeah.
Which was not always, it wasn't always that well received, but it did happen.
What's your mind thinking while you're sitting here with your idols? All of a sudden you're thrown into this position with Chris Squire.
I mean, we couldn't believe it. It was from being like a couple of pop guys, we were sitting recording a track with Chris Squire and Bill Bruford, you know, one of the kind of legendary Yes rhythm section. That's pretty weird. I mean, it was even weirder when we joined them, you know.
Recording drama then, and how did it flow in the studio for you guys?
Well, it was the reason why it's called drama is because it was high drama, you know, because I think Yes were getting a lot of pressure from people, the fans, say, you can't do this, you know, you can't join up with a couple of pop guys, you know, John Anderson's God and Wakeman's the Cape Crusader, you know. You've got these two guys who basically have kind of come in through the back door as a couple of pop guys. So yeah, I mean, that was strange. So they felt that pressure. They got Eddie Offord back in. Eddie didn't finish the album because he did whatever he did.
Yeah.
And we had to kind of finish it ourselves with an engineer, producer called Hugh Patcham. So we
I didn't know that. I didn't know that Hugh worked on that.
Yeah, Hugh and Gary Langan actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so we finished it at Psalm and the Townhouse Studios. So yeah, I mean it was drama. Something different would turn up every day. You know, something weird had happened. But we got through it, and I think, as an album goes, you know, I think the songs themselves still stand up as being a good direction for Yes to have taken at that time, bearing in mind that they'd come off Tormato, which was considered to be Yes's worst album by the majority of Yes fans. It was not well received, so I think that Yes were at a bit of a turning point as to what they would do, and you know, I think we at least did bring them into a different direction, which I think, in hindsight, became even more apparent when they started to move towards the 90125 stuff, which was, you know, was this these great historic band from the 70s suddenly turning in and getting an injection of like high technology into the music, you know, and that's really how I think what we did manage to bring to the equation.
What were the highlights of the drama period for you?
The biggest thing was actually going from being someone who was just on Top of the Pops, you know, which is that's our regular kind of weekly pop show.
Yeah.
Not actually performing live, but just miming. I mean, me and Trevor must have done God knows how many mime around Europe. We were just doing that. To actually suddenly say, right, now it's the gloves are off, it's live time.
Yeah.
And that was a real challenge. And I remember I used to stay up like weeks and weeks learning Wakeman's parts, Tony Kaye's parts. I mean, I obviously knew the bands because the early Yes I was a big fan of. So I got some kind of knowledge of it, but even so, I wanted to make it good. And my main memory is actually that very first night we played in Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens, which was the opening night of the show, and I couldn't believe it. You know, 18,000 people there, and it's like, wow. You know, there's 5 of us on a revolving stage.
Yeah.
That was amazing, you know. I mean, I think once you've made that move and you know how powerful it can be on a live basis, then there was no turning back for me, really. And I think that helped move me forward to the Asia stuff as well.
Why does the drama version of Yes disband?
I think for a number of reasons, really. I think the main reason was that the fan base were beginning to reject, and Yes, the main guys in Yes were worried about them losing, you know, all of a sudden. I mean, even though the album sold okay, you know, it wasn't a bad selling album. I think it was to do with the fact that possibly Trevor's persona on stage, he didn't really want to do it anymore because I think he felt uncomfortable in that role. And it's different for me because I was naturally a keyboard player anyway, so I just kind of grew into that role, if you like. But I think for Trevor, he found it very, very hard, and I think Alan and Chris wanted to really do something else, which they did for a while, and Steve was kind of left not knowing what he was going to do, and hence that started to create the Asia situation.
How did you find your way to Asia?
Well, myself and Trevor did another album immediately after that, once the Yes thing had finished, which was after the UK tour, and everyone sort of virtually went their own ways. We got in the studio and started work on the next Buggles album, which we did about 8 or 9 demos for. And I think what happened then was I got an approach from Brian that he was putting together this band through with David Geffen. They'd tried various versions before. And in the meantime, John Wetton had started working with Steve Howe on some writing stuff. And obviously they were looking for a drummer and a keyboard player. And eventually they got round to me, and they got round to asking Carl. And everyone just kind of got together one day, and we said, right, this looks good. So we got together and started working pretty well there and then.
Now, I know that you and John Wetton became pretty close as far as the songwriting team goes during that period. At what point did you feel that there was a strong connection with John Wetton?
I think it was fairly early on, because I think the stuff that he'd been writing with Steve, he wasn't that happy that it was what Asia should be, because I think you've got to realise these guys had all come from bands that were making music that was very sort of period 70s. It was like it had that, whether you like it or not, it had that tag on it. It was progressive rock in the 70s. And I think John really wanted to do something that was much more instant, much more dynamically rock orientated. And I don't think he was getting that writing with Steve. Obviously, because my background was slightly delayed from those guys.
Yeah.
I'd come up more as in the pop area, if you like, because I'd written commercials and that kind of thing. I think he thought that I was the man that would make it work with him. So that's when we started putting it together, and it was a very, very simple process. He'd have one bit, I'd have another. We put them together, and that was it. And that was virtually how every song worked on that album.
Now, how long did the first Asia album take to record, and how many songs ended up not making it on the record? I mean, are there some in the archives somewhere you recorded that we'd never heard before?
There were about 2 or 3 from the first album. We didn't actually do that many. The album took about 4 months altogether. But we were rehearsing for about 4 months before that. So I'd say the whole process from beginning to end, by the time the album came out at the beginning of '82, was probably about 9 months in total. We were initially looking for another vocalist. This is the thing that it was going to be a 5-piece, a la Yes, a similar lineup to Yes.
Yeah, I heard Trevor Rabin actually tried out at some point.
Trevor tried out, Robert Fleischman from the Journey singer, former Journey singer. Quite a few people, but in the end, I think that the strength of the writing with me and John was getting to the point where he was singing the songs, he was singing them in rehearsals, and so we said, why don't we just settle as a 4-piece, and we'll take it from there.
And what did Mr. Geffen think about that, or John Kolodner think about that?
John Kolodner thought it was quite a good idea. No, he was trying to initiate us being a 5-piece. But I think when he heard the music we were coming up with, and the fact that John's voice seemed to suit the music, it was that sort of the classic sort of English tenor, and also we still had the bass playing and all the rest of it. So it was very much, as much as it was a kind of a commercial rock band, it was also a musician's band.
Yeah.
And I think that was the thing that attracted Geffen. They saw the potential in that they could pull in the Asia, the Yes and the ELP fans who were still around, that had followed them from that period, but also create a band that had its own sound that really actually moved on from that.
And that album is just tight all the way through. It's a classic.
Yeah, I think people do put it down as in the sort of top sort of 50 rock albums or whatever as being a definitive debut album by a band who were labelled the first supergroup.
Yeah,
that was the thing that had its benefits, and it was more of a promotional tool than it was actually what it was all about, because we did actually get on, and we liked each other's companies, and I think we liked to work on the stuff together. So I don't think that was the reason why. I don't think we were actually manufactured in that sense. But obviously there were big players in the game like David Geffen, like John Kolodner, Brian Lane, who were actually wanting to make all this happen.
Heat of the Moment goes to #1. What were the highlights of that time, that first Asia album and that first tour?
It was a little bit like the Buggles thing all over again for me, but this was in America. You know, this was a much bigger deal.
Yeah.
And the fact that I'd written a lot of the material, really, it was surreal in many ways, because I remember we had a fairly small tour booked. I think we were booked into about 2,000 seaters, that kind of thing, which, okay, was based on the fact that he'd been in that band, he'd been in that, etc., etc. I think that once we got over here and the record really started to take off, and I remember sitting in a car with John Wetton, and I said, "Oh look, John, the record's on the radio. It's Wildest Dreams or something." And he went, "Oh yeah, that's great." And then he moved the dial, and the Heat of the Moment was on another station. It was like, I think this is quite serious.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was I always remember that moment specifically, because that was the moment where I think we knew that the band was going to possibly exceed what people had expected of it.
Yeah, I had a chance to see you actually on the first tour at the Fox Theater in San Diego, and it was an amazing show.
Right, yeah,
amazing.
The whole rig and everything.
Yeah. How did the mood of the band change during the Alpha period? Because it seemed like there was some mood changes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right with that. There were mood changes. I think that the main thing was that John and Steve ceased to get along. I think because they were the two guys at the front. I was busy doing my own thing, fiddling with keyboards, and Carl was under the riser surrounded by gongs and cymbals. I think the main thing was that John and Steve didn't seem to get on, and that started quite a few problems. I think a lot of it was to do with the fact that it was so big, that first album, and that increases the amount of problems that you've got in some ways. If it had been, say, moderately successful and we could have built on that, then I think that wouldn't have created so much tension. But when you've got an album that just flies in the box and is not #1 for 10 weeks, where do you go from there? Everyone's saying, well, where's the Heat of the Moment on this record?
Yeah.
The Alpha. The weight had been pushed on me and John to write all the songs, so Steve then felt that he was pushed out, because obviously we'd written the major tracks on the first album, so Steve felt that he was being pushed out. That created more problems. We recorded the album away from home, where we recorded the previous album in London. We moved to Montreal and recorded it there. Of course, everybody's away from home, 60 miles away out of Montreal in the middle of nowhere. You can imagine what that's like for months on end, and it's not. Everyone was just going stir crazy, and I think that when it actually came out, Alpha, we'd kind of lost quite a lot of ground, and we had quite a big tour booked, which was probably a bit too ambitious, and the whole thing started to lose momentum at that point.
One of the great songs that I love off of Alpha is Midnight Sun. Now, I realize you guys wrote that earlier on, but that is still a great track.
My ex-wife's family is from Norway. I've got a couple of kids out there, and that was inspired by really a time me and John Wetton went out there, and we said, no, let's write a song called Midnight Sun, because the land of the midnight sun.
And the solo in that, Steve Howe really outdid himself on that solo.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, the great thing about Steve's soloing, and I kind of missed it over the years in some instances, is that he's very melodic, so you can memorize his solo, so it's almost like a hook in its own way, and that is the beauty of Steve Howe's playing, is he plays melodies.
Yeah, and there's a start, a middle, and a finish to his solos.
Yeah.
The build up.
So it's like its own little arrangement in its own way.
I really felt that Steve Howe was a very integral and very important part of that period in Asia.
I think so. I think everybody played that part. I think everyone was pushing and pulling, and I think that what the end result was that it went in the right direction. That goes for musically and personally as well. I think that, as I say, the problems stem once you start to adjust the chemistry of something, then you just take one ingredient out and effectively you don't have the same thing, and I think that's what happened to us.
It's the whole cake theory.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't have those ingredients for the cake, it's not gonna work.
That's right, exactly.
Now, Greg Lake is brought in to sing on vocals. Now, John himself told me that he just got a call one day, pretty much from either Kolodner or Geffen or somebody that said,
I think it's fair to say that they wanted him out, because I think that they felt that Steve Howe was more of an integral part, and they wanted John out. I think he started to get a bit verbal with Kolodner and Geffen and stuff. They don't take too kindly to it when they're pushing the boat out to the level they were on the band.
Yeah.
And that didn't help. So I think it came to the point where Steve Howe said, well, either he goes or I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was it, really.
How did Wetton return out for the Astro record? How did that come about?
I really missed working with him, and I kind of went along with the corporate decision when he was ousted from the band, and we had this thing booked, the Asia and Asia thing with Greg Lake, and I really, I think I felt that I just had to do it for whatever reason. And it was pretty obvious it wasn't going to work with Greg long term. When we did that Asia and Asia thing, I called up Kolodner and I said, look, I think we should get John back in.
Yeah.
Because we've got to write the songs, and me and him write the songs. So he sort of went, okay, well, maybe we'll get someone else on guitar then, if you really want to wet him back that badly, So that was the next move that happened, and then Kolodner suggested getting Mandy Meyer in.
Oh, really? So there wasn't, you guys didn't audition anybody else? Mandy Meyer was the first choice because of Kolodner?
It was really a case of, we started rehearsing for the third album with the original lineup. But then the old chestnut started arriving between John Wetton. Once John Wetton had come back in again, he said, well, I'm not working with Steve Howe. Me and Carl were trying to steer a middle road and say, look, guys, let's just try and get this done, So in the end, Steve went and Mandy Meyer was brought in. Yeah, we didn't audition. We approached a couple of people, but it wasn't to be.
Now, Mandy Meyer, he was more of a heavy metal guitar player, although I must say, I feel that the Astro record, musically, is a fantastic record also, and I love it. I think there's some great songs on there. Rock and Roll Dream is awesome. Go is great. There's some great ballads on there.
Well, I think he was more the kind of guitar player that John Wetton wanted to work with, because John had gone into much more of a
commercial sensibility,
commercial and a heavier mode, and there were quite a few bands coming through there that had those kind of guitarists playing with them, rather than the classic sort of 70s type guitarists.
Yeah.
And I think that was his thinking on that, and he was, for a lot of the time, he was quite happy with the way the record went. And the only problem was that by that time, Geffen had really started to lose interest and confidence in the project, as it were. And we took a long time on the album. It was remixed about 3 times. And in the end, it came out after, in a wrong time. Go didn't really hit the charts as heavy as they'd expected. They got a little bit of a kickback on radio, so I think that's really what happened with the Astro album, and subsequently it didn't really do, it peaked at about 40 something in the chart,
So at this point, you guys just decide, look, we're not even going to go out and tour to support this, right?
Yeah, that was it. That was really it. And I think by that time, Carl had already started talking with
Greg Lake
and Keith.
Yeah.
And I'd been approached to produce this album for GTR, Steve Howe and Steve Hackett. So I thought, well, whilst we're in this limbo period, I'll just concentrate on that.
Now, how did you enjoy that? Now, what was it like working with Steve Hackett?
Steve Hackett was actually pretty cool. Yeah.
He seems like a mellow guy.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, he didn't get on with Steve.
Yeah.
This must be something to do with Steve.
Yeah, Jonathan Mover says that he will never, ever be in a group. He wants to be a hired gun from now on because of that experience.
Right, yeah, yeah. Well, that was I think it was his first album.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very, very hard because, he's a fantastic drummer.
Yeah.
Brilliant drummer. And all the elements of the band were there. I think it was just that they, the first album they really gelled on, and I could see, a horrible parallel with the Asia situation and unveiling before me, because when we started the second album, that seemed to have the same kind of, seemed to be fraught with the same problems that Alpha was, the second album. So I don't know whether it was the debut album jinx or something, but Arista pulled the plug on that one.
So the second album never came to fruition, and there are some great moments on there. Imagining is a great song.
Imagining's great, yeah. Reach Out, that's a great song.
Here I Wait. That is a fantastic breakdown.
No, that's what really got me excited to do the project, because I felt that that they'd written some really good songs and they sounded great in rehearsals. The band all gelled well together, and again, it was the problem that once you take away an element, which was when Steve Hackett said, "Look, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore."
Yeah.
Then you can try and patch up the ship, but it's never going to be like it was then.
No,
and
exactly.
That's the situation.
Asia reforms in 1990.
Well, I think at the time we had when Then and Now came out in 89, I think it was, or 90.
Mm-hmm.
John and Carl had been talking to Kolodner quite a bit about redoing the thing, and Kolodner was kind of half interested in this as a concept, to put Asia back again. I mean, 4 or 5 years later than when Astra came out. So I was working with, actually, funny enough, Greg Lake at the time, and I decided to give it a try. Kolodner called me up and said, "Look, the guys want to go out and do some stuff." We thought about putting a package together, 5 songs from the old period and five new songs. So we did it, Then and Now. But at that point, I don't think John's heart was really in it.
Oh, really?
He wanted to be a solo artist, and I think he'd been offered a reasonable deal to be a solo artist. Carl had already gone back and reformed with Greg and Keith. So in the end, I think I was just sort of left, well, do I keep Asia going or not at this point in time?
Yeah.
And a few people just said to me, well, why don't you just carry the band on? And that's when I thought about John Payne, who I'd known for quite a few years before that, and asked him if he'd be interested in keeping it up and running.
Okay, so now tell me about John Payne. What are his credentials, and how did you meet him, and how long did you know him?
Well, I actually met John through Phil Spalding, who was a bass player in GTR. He was a friend of John's, and he gave me some of the stuff he was doing, and that was a few years before. And it was really adventurous stuff, and I was really quite excited about the prospect of working with him at some point. And it was really, when the Asia thing, we thought about putting that up and running again, that was when I got in touch with him, and thought at that point, which I think is right to a good degree, is that it would actually put a whole new slant on the direction that the band was going. It was the 90s. I didn't really want it to sound like the original band, because the original band's the original band.
Yeah.
And I didn't want us to be chasing our tails on it.
Chasing the dragon.
Well, yes, very well put. I think the problem tends to be when bands try and recreate their sound of yesteryear, thinking that that's the right way to go. I don't really adhere to that theory, really. So I wanted to change the way that it was, still maintaining the elements of arrangement and the chorus aspect. Asia was always big on chorus.
Yeah.
That's really the way that we've always written.
So now Asia's done well for you in the second half of its life, maybe its third life or fourth life, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think that once John had come in, as I say, I've always liked working with Steve. I'd work with Steve anytime, because I think that I'd work with all of them anytime. I mean, I just wrote with John Wetton last year. We wrote a couple of songs for his solo album. So I'm not sort of, we're not kind of blinkered enough to think that, but I think that it was a way to go forward with maybe having the nucleus of 2 people and enabling us to use really whoever we thought was good for that specific album, and that's pretty much the way that it's been since then.
When you're dealing with that many attitudes. I mean, Steve Howe had huge success in Yes.
Yeah.
He's a man that really doesn't need to stay in a band to get a paycheck. He's going to say, hey, I either want it this way or I want to do my own thing. When it seems like you're more in a comfortable position now with Asia. Everybody's comfortable. Everybody's happy being where they're at. There's no complaining.
Well, I think the reason for that largely is because the band was made up of members of other bands. I think that really that someone like Carl, for instance, Asia was an interesting diversion. But, ELP is his baby. It's got his name in it.
Yeah.
That's it. And the same with Steve and Yes. I think even though Steve was out of Yes for about 10 years, I think that it's still very much in his bones.
Yeah.
And I think with me, because Asia was my first band and I've written the majority of the material throughout, I think I felt that it was my baby,
Now, you're here today for a benefit concert. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
We're doing a series of two-man shows around the States, and our management company, Ace Trump, has been putting the feelers out for people who thought they would be a nice idea for us to come out and do it. So there's been quite a lot of organisation, getting the routing together. But we've got about 15 or 16 shows altogether. So it's an interesting way, because we're playing exclusively Asian material, but obviously we're doing it with a very different focus.
How's the touring life changed for you as far as from starting off to now? Is it easy on you? Is it hard on you? Do you love it? Do you miss it?
I love being on the road. I mean, I like both aspects of studio and touring, to be in sort of equal quantities. I still get a kick out of playing the old songs, and I mean, I think some people go and they do gigs and they're just like, they don't play it, just listen to my new album, which I think is slightly wrong. One disappointing thing about Yes, I think, is that they don't actually do any music from the Trevor Rabin period. A little bit of a sad reflection when you think about a band that's got a 35-year career, and there's like 12 missing years or something.
Well, I still wish they would do some of that drama stuff, but that's not going to happen.
Well, that's not going to happen either. Yeah, so Chris occasionally did put in a little bit of a lean
Tempest Fusion.
Yeah. But that was like 10 seconds long.
Yeah, and his solo. It's good times, though. It was good times.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to ask you, and a lot of the fans are wondering about this, we know that out there somewhere there are actual professionally shot videos, live videos of the original incarnation of Asia, with Steve Howe, and also that there are actual board tapes that sound excellent, and crisp and clear of the original Asia. I don't know when those are going to come out, but drama, is there anything shot from that besides music videos?
Well, visual.
Yeah.
I doubt it, because I don't imagine it would be done professionally. I think Tempest Fugit was filmed, wasn't it? I think but largely speaking, I think that it's a little bit free when people had, well, obviously DVDs, but the quality of cameras. So it would mainly be fan footage, I think. It'd be great to see that, but that I know of, and I'm fairly clued up with what's about. I mean, I know what kind of things were recorded at the time. I mean, I had a lot of archive of material that I had actually put on. I've got someone actually archiving it for me, which is all the old rehearsal tapes from Asia, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, see, you got to release that somehow.
And there's probably about 6 or 7 CDs of Trevor Rabin singing "Only Time Will Tell." And,
really?
All kinds of things like that. Well, I used to tape every rehearsal. Sometimes it was only on a cassette, other times it was on a 2-track Revox. But
I'm surprised that stuff hasn't been bootlegged yet.
Yeah, I know. It'll probably sneak out somewhere. I don't trust the guy I've got archiving it.
Well, Geoff, like I said again, it's been awesome talking to you. All right, this is Blairing Out with Eric Blair with Geoff Downes of Asia, signing off. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This is the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show. Recently, OC Weekly did a cover story celebrating the 20-year anniversary of the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show on cable television. I want to personally thank all of the dedicated viewers for the last 20 years. Please continue to spread the word and subscribe to the show on YouTube. You can read the OC Weekly article written by Nate Jackson at the link below.
The Blairing Out Show.